and I still can't believe he's really gone. No matter what I do, I can't accept that he won't come back. My mom is crying, and it breaks my heart.
Jack Osbourne broke his silence, and what he revealed will absolutely shatter everything you thought you knew about growing up as Ozzy's son. This isn't about fame, fortune, or rock and roll glory. This is about a son who nearly lost himself trying to save a father who was drowning right in front of him. You think you know the Osbourne family story? You don't know anything. While the world was laughing at their reality show antics, Jack was living through hell. Behind every chaotic moment you saw on television was a teenager desperately trying to hold together a family that was falling apart at the seams. And the truth Jack finally admitted: he wasn't just Ozzy's son. He was his keeper, his protector, and sometimes his only lifeline to reality. Here's what you missed. When Jack was 17 years old, he made a phone call that saved his father's life. It was 2003 and Ozzy had crashed his ATV on their property. But this wasn't just any accident. Jack found his father broken, bleeding, and barely conscious. In that moment, as he called for help, Jack realized something that would haunt him for years. His dad wasn't invincible. The Prince of Darkness, the man who bit the head off a bat, who survived decades of drug abuse and chaos, was mortal, and Jack was terrified. But here's the part that will break your heart. While Jack was trying to save his father, he was simultaneously destroying himself. The pressure of being Ozzy Osbourne's son wasn't just about living up to a legend. It was about carrying the weight of that legend's demons. Every time Ozzy stumbled, Jack caught him. Every time the family needed strength, Jack provided it. Every time the world demanded the Osbournes to be entertaining, Jack sacrificed pieces of his own identity to make it happen. The emotional truth Jack revealed: he spent his entire childhood and teenage years being more mature than the adults around him. While other kids were worried about homework and dadding, Jack was managing family crises, covering for his father's absences, and pretending everything was fine when cameras were rolling. He became an expert at reading his father's moods, predicting his breakdowns, and stepping in before disaster struck. And this destroyed him. Jack's confession gets even more heartbreaking. He admitted that watching his father battle addiction didn't scare him away from drugs. It actually drew him closer to them. Because in Jack's mind, if substances could make his father's pain disappear, maybe they could make his pain disappear too. The son who spent years trying to save his father from addiction became addicted himself. The irony was crushing, but it was also inevitable. Think about this for a second. Jack Osbourne, at 19 years old, was checking himself into rehab facilities while simultaneously trying to manage his father's recovery. 2 generations of Osbourne men, both fighting the same demons, both trying to save each other while drowning in their own darkness. This wasn't a family dynamic. This was a survival strategy that was killing them both. But Jack's most shocking revelation wasn't about the addiction. It was about the silence. The Osbourne family, famous for airing their dysfunction on national television, had secrets that never made it to the cameras. Jack carried these secrets alone. The nights when Ozzy couldn't remember his own name. The mornings when Jack had to physically help his father get dressed because his hands were shaking too badly. The phone calls from venues wondering if Ozzy would show up, and Jack having to make excuses he'd memorized by heart. Jack became his father's translator to the world, his buffer against reality, and his emotional caretaker, all before he was old enough to legally drink. The emotional labor was suffocating him, but Jack felt responsible. Because in his mind, if he stepped back, if he stopped managing everything, his father would die, and the family would collapse, and it would be his fault. Here's where it gets really twisted. The world saw Jack as the rebellious kid, the troublemaker, the one who couldn't handle fame, but the truth was the opposite. Jack was handling everything. He was the one person in that family who never broke character, never stopped performing, never allowed himself the luxury of falling apart. Because someone had to hold it together, and that someone was always Jack. The pressure didn't just affect his relationship with his father. It affected his relationship with himself. Jack admitted that for years, he didn't know who he was outside of being Ozzy's son, outside of being the family's problem solver, outside of being everyone else's emotional support system. His own identity had been completely consumed by his role as the family's backbone. And when Jack finally reached his breaking point, when his own addiction spiraled out of control, he realized something terrifying. He had become exactly like his father, but with one crucial difference. His father had people who would catch him when he fell. Jack had been catching everyone else for so long that when he finally fell, he was falling alone. That's when everything changed. That's when Jack made a decision that would either save both of them or destroy their relationship forever. But what Jack discovered about his father in that moment, what Ozzy said to him when Jack was at his lowest point, would completely rewrite everything Jack thought he knew about being a son, being a protector, and being human. And that conversation, it's more shocking than anything you've ever heard. What Jack revealed next will make you understand why the Osbourne family reality show was actually the greatest cover-up in television history. Because while America was being entertained by their dysfunction, Jack was living through trauma that would break most adults, let alone a teenager. Here's what really happened behind those cameras, and it's nothing like what you saw on TV. The Osbournes aired their dirty laundry for the world to see, but they kept the darkest secrets locked away. Jack finally admitted what those secrets were, and they're absolutely devastating. The show made Ozzy's erratic behavior look funny, endearing even. But Jack lived with the reality of what that behavior actually meant. There were nights when Ozzy would disappear for days, and Jack would have to lie to everyone about where he was. There were mornings when Jack would find his father passed out in places that could have killed him, and he'd have to clean up the mess before anyone else woke up. But here's the part that will destroy you. Jack wasn't just covering for his father's addiction. He was covering for his father's complete mental breakdowns. The show portrayed Ozzy as lovably confused, but Jack witnessed something much darker. There were episodes where Ozzy didn't recognize his own family. Moments where the man who raised him would look at Jack like he was a complete stranger. And Jack, still a teenager, had to pretend this was normal while his heart was breaking into pieces. The emotional abuse wasn't intentional, but it was constant. Ozzy, in his altered states, would say things to Jack that carved wounds so deep they never healed. He'd blame Jack for family problems, accuse him of not caring enough, or worse, tell him he was a disappointment. Then when Ozzy sobered up, he wouldn't remember any of it. But Jack remembered everything. Every cruel word, every broken promise, every moment when his father looked at him with complete emptiness instead of love. And Sharon, the world saw her as the strong matriarch holding the family together, but Jack revealed a different truth. Sharon was fighting her own battles, dealing with her own trauma from Ozzy's behavior, and she often couldn't protect Jack from the emotional fallout. So Jack learned to protect himself, which meant building walls so high that even his own family couldn't reach him when he needed them most. Here's where Jack's story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. While he was drowning in his father's chaos, Jack discovered something that made everything worse. He realized he had inherited more than just Ozzy's last name. He had inherited his addictive tendencies, his self-destructive patterns, and his ability to hurt the people who loved him most. But unlike his father, Jack was aware of it. He could see himself becoming the very thing that had traumatized him, and he was powerless to stop it. The family secret that Jack carried alone was this. He wasn't just afraid of losing his father to addiction. He was afraid of becoming his father, and that fear was eating him alive from the inside out. Every drink Jack took, every pill he swallowed, every destructive choice he made felt like a step closer to becoming the person who had caused him so much pain. It was a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. But the most devastating secret was about their relationship during Jack's own addiction. The world assumed Ozzy would understand, that he'd be supportive, that he'd help Jack get clean because he'd been through it himself. The reality was the opposite. Ozzy was terrified, not just of losing Jack, but of facing the fact that his own behavior had contributed to his son's destruction. The guilt was paralyzing Ozzy, which meant that when Jack needed his father most, Ozzy was emotionally unavailable, drowning in his own shame and regret. Jack found himself in an impossible situation. He was battling addiction while trying to manage his father's guilt about that addiction. He was the patient and the therapist, the victim and the caretaker, all at the same time. And the pressure was killing him faster than the drugs ever could. Here's the secret that changes everything. During Jack's darkest moments, when he was at his absolute lowest, he made a discovery about his father that nobody knew. Ozzy had been keeping detailed journals throughout Jack's entire childhood. Private writings where he documented every mistake he made as a father, every moment he wasn't present, every way he felt he had failed his son. Pages and pages of regret, love, and desperation, from a man who appeared to be oblivious to his impact on his family. Jack found these journals by accident, and what he read in them shattered every assumption he'd made about his father. Ozzy wasn't just aware of the damage he was causing. He was tormented by it. Every absence Jack felt, Ozzy had written about it. Every disappointment, every broken promise, every moment when Jack needed him and he wasn't there, Ozzy had documented his own failure with brutal honesty. But here's what made it even more heartbreaking. In those journals, Ozzy wrote about his fear that Jack was better off without him. That maybe the kindest thing he could do as a father was to stay away, to stop inflicting his chaos on his son's life. Ozzy thought his absence was protection when Jack interpreted it as abandonment. The secret that Jack carried was that both of them were drowning separately, each thinking they were protecting the other by suffering alone. They were both trying to save each other while destroying themselves, and neither one knew that the other was doing the same thing. That's when Jack realized something that would change their entire relationship. The problem wasn't that his father didn't love him enough. The problem was that his father loved him so much that the fear of hurting him was preventing him from helping him. And Jack's fear of becoming his father was preventing him from accepting his father's love. But what happened next, the conversation that followed this discovery, would either heal them both or destroy them completely. And Jack's decision about what to do with this knowledge, it's more shocking than anything you could imagine. What Jack did next defied every expectation, broke every rule of their toxic family dynamic, and ultimately saved both their lives. But first, he had to risk destroying their relationship completely. Armed with the devastating knowledge from his father's journals, Jack made a decision that shocked everyone, including himself. Instead of confronting Ozzy with anger or resentment, instead of using those journals as weapons in their ongoing emotional war, Jack did something that nobody saw coming. He wrote his own letter to his father, and what he said in that letter changed everything. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. Jack didn't give his father the letter right away. First, he did something that required more courage than anything else he'd ever done in his life. He got clean. Not for his family, not for his career, not for his public image. He got clean specifically so he could have one honest conversation with his father while they were both sober. One conversation where neither of them was hiding behind substances, behind excuses, behind the chaos that had defined their relationship for decades. When Jack finally approached his father with that letter, Ozzy's reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of defensiveness, instead of denial, instead of the emotional walls that had kept them apart for so long, Ozzy broke down completely. Not the dramatic, performative breakdown that the world was used to seeing, but a quiet, devastating collapse of a man who had been carrying unbearable guilt for 20 years. And that's when Jack did something that redefined what it means to be a son. Instead of demanding apologies, instead of listing grievances, instead of trying to make his father pay for the pain he'd caused, Jack looked at this broken man and said the words that would heal them both. "Dad, I forgive you. But more importantly, you need to forgive yourself." This wasn't just forgiveness. This was Jack in his early 20s becoming the parent his father had never been able to be. It was a complete role reversal that should have felt wrong, but instead felt like the most natural thing in the world. Because Jack realized that Ozzy hadn't failed to grow up out of selfishness or cruelty. He had failed to grow up because nobody had ever taught him how. Here's where their story takes an incredible turn. Instead of Ozzy teaching Jack about life, about responsibility, about being a man, Jack started teaching Ozzy. He taught him how to have a conversation without substances. He taught him how to sit with uncomfortable emotions without running away. He taught him how to be present in a moment instead of always escaping to the next distraction. And Ozzy, this legendary rock star who had commanded audiences of millions, became his son's most dedicated student. He started showing up to Jack's recovery meetings, not as the famous father, but as someone who genuinely wanted to learn how to be better. He asked Jack questions about emotions, about relationships, about how to handle stress without destroying everything around him. The transformation was remarkable, but it wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns tried to resurface, times when both of them wanted to retreat back into their familiar dysfunction because healing was more painful than staying broken. But Jack held the line. Every time his father started to slip back into old behaviors, Jack would call him out with love, with firmness, with the kind of accountability that Ozzy had never experienced before. Here's what made their new dynamic so powerful. Jack wasn't trying to fix his father. He was teaching his father how to fix himself. And Ozzy, for the first time in his life, was learning what it felt like to have someone believe in his ability to change, not just hope that he would change. The breakthrough moment came when Ozzy finally read Jack's letter. In it, Jack had written about his fear of becoming his father, but also about his gratitude for inheriting his father's strength, his resilience, his ability to survive impossible circumstances. Jack had taken everything that made Ozzy destructive and found a way to transform it into something healing. But then Jack revealed something that left everyone speechless. He told his father that the journals, the ones filled with regret and self-hatred, had actually saved his life. Because in reading them, Jack realized that his father's love had always been there, buried under layers of addiction and trauma, but never absent. And knowing that changed everything about how Jack saw himself, how he saw their relationship, how he saw his future. Ozzy's response was the most honest thing he'd ever said to his son. "You became the man I always wanted to be." And in that moment, the generational cycle of trauma, addiction, and emotional unavailability was finally broken. But the story doesn't end there. Because just when Jack thought they had found their peace, just when he believed they could finally have the father-son relationship they'd both always wanted, he received a message that would test everything they'd built together and force Jack to make the hardest decision of his life. The message Jack received would test everything he and his father had built together. But it also revealed the most profound truth about what it really means to break generational cycles and redefine what family legacy actually looks like. That message came in the form of a phone call from his sister Kelly, crying, telling Jack that their father was struggling again. Not with substances this time, but with something deeper, something that threatened to unravel all the progress they'd made. Ozzy was battling severe depression, convinced that despite all their healing, he had still irreparably damaged his children. The guilt was consuming him all over again, but now it was guilt about the guilt, shame about the shame, a recursive loop of self-destruction that was pulling him back into darkness. Jack faced a choice that would define the rest of their relationship. He could step back, protect his own recovery, maintain the healthy boundaries he'd worked so hard to establish. Or he could risk everything he'd built for himself to save his father one more time. Most people would have chosen self-preservation. Jack chose love. But here's what makes Jack's decision so remarkable. He didn't go back to being his father's caretaker, his emotional manager, his keeper of secrets. Instead, he approached this crisis as an equal, as someone who understood that healing isn't a destination but a daily choice that you have to make over and over again. Jack didn't rescue his father. He reminded his father how to rescue himself. The conversation they had during that crisis became the template for every interaction they would have for the rest of their relationship. Jack told his father something that revealed the true emotional truth of their entire journey. "Dad, you didn't break me. You taught me how to be unbreakable. Everything you went through, everything we went through, it didn't damage me. It prepared me." And that's when Jack shared the most profound realization of his entire life. He told his father that all those years of chaos, all those moments of having to be stronger than he should have been, all that pain and trauma and dysfunction had actually been his greatest gift. Because it taught him resilience at a cellular level. It taught him how to find stability in instability, how to love people who are struggling without losing himself in their struggle, how to be present for others without sacrificing his own well-being. Jack's emotional truth wasn't about forgiving his father despite the damage he'd caused. It was about recognizing that the damage had actually been the foundation for his strength. The child who had to grow up too fast became an adult who could handle anything. The teenager who had to navigate his family's chaos became a man who could bring peace to any situation. The son who had to save his father became someone who could save himself. But here's the part that will change how you think about family trauma forever. Jack realized that his father hadn't failed him by being broken. His father had succeeded in raising him by showing him what broken looked like, so Jack could choose to be whole. Ozzy's greatest achievement as a father wasn't his moments of strength. It was his willingness to let Jack see his weakness, because that transparency taught Jack how to be honest about his own struggles. This is the legacy that Jack carries now. Not the rock star legacy, not the fame or the fortune or the family name. The legacy of breaking cycles. The legacy of turning trauma into wisdom, dysfunction into strength, pain into purpose. Jack didn't just survive his childhood. He transformed it into a superpower. And this is what Jack wants every person who struggled with family dysfunction to understand. You are not broken by the broken people who raised you. You are forged by them. Every moment you had to be stronger than you should have been, every time you had to figure things out on your own, every instance where you had to be the adult in a room full of adults who couldn't handle their responsibilities, those moments didn't damage you. They prepared you to handle anything life could throw at you. Jack's message to the world is this: stop waiting for your parents to become who you needed them to be. Start becoming who you needed them to be. Stop trying to heal them. Start using what they taught you, even the painful lessons, to heal yourself and break the cycle for the next generation. The emotional truth that Jack discovered is that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. It requires showing up, even when you don't know what you're doing, even when you're struggling, even when you're broken. His father showed up imperfectly, but he showed up. And that imperfect presence taught Jack how to show up perfectly for his own children. That's the real legacy. Not the music, not the fame, not the chaos. The decision to love better than you were loved, to be more present than your parents could be, to take everything that hurt you and use it as fuel to make sure the next generation hurts less. Jack Osbourne didn't just survive being Ozzy's son. He used that experience to become the father, the man, the person he was meant to be. And in doing so, he gave his father the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that despite everything, he had raised someone extraordinary. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to be stronger than you should have been for someone you love, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. What would you tell your younger self about surviving family chaos? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe for more raw, real stories that matter.